Good, we're live. We'll call to order this regular meeting of the Eastern Reading Region 9 Joint Policy Committee at 9:05 on September 30th, 2022. Members in attendance, John Stinson and Chris Parkin. Also in attendance, we have the chair of the Easton board here, Randy Hicks, and we have a couple of members from the Region 9 Region 9 Policy Committee. Who are not an official meeting here, but are sort of providing comments in their capacity here today, because the Region 9 Policy Committee was not posted as sort of taking place. So the Region 9 Committee is not going to be taking any action today. They're simply providing us with their comments as it relates to the process that we were working through. And obviously also in attendance is Dr. McKinnon, our fearless superintendent. That is on the record and is now official. You are fearless. So sorry, live with that.
I'll make a note of that.
All right. The first item on the agenda for the Joint Policy Committee is the approval of minutes from September 23rd. Do I have a motion?
I would make one correction, which is that Randy is noted as an other board member. He was actually present as a member of the Joint Policy Committee, sitting ex officio.
Yeah, as board chair of the Easton board, I think that is correct. Good.
Otherwise, they're fine.
And just a comment for the public record, because Region 9 Policy Committee is not formally meeting, we can't approve the minutes, but we can certainly table that for approval at the joint meeting. I'd ask John, when you and Sarah connect on the joint agenda for the next one, just put this on that. Yeah.
We'll make sure that it's noted there.
Yeah.
Very good. Absent objection, we'll consider the minutes approved from the September 23rd meeting with the amendment noted by Mr. Parkin. And we'll move on to public comment. Seeing no members of the public present, we'll move to committee member comment. Hearing none, we'll move on to discussion on possible action. And so just a little bit of a sort of table setting and recap of the process and sort of where we left off. So, and I think for this, I'll share my screen. So our task was to go through the items listed. Dr. McKinnon has done a sort of Herculean task and sort of gone through and worked to detangle all of the various policies that we just reviewed, that in sort of various boards, whether it's Easton, Reading, or the Region 9 board, we may have different policies that have been approved, reviewed and approved, went through first reading, went through second reading, and were approved. We may have policies that were sort of put on the shelf, and sort of keeping track of this and sort of ticking and tying and creating a meaningful sort of manifestation of what are the policies was a task that Dr. McKinnon worked on, and I'm sure with great assistance from others in central office. And this is the sheet that we are sort of looking at. Our task was not to sort of make any edits to any of those policies, but to simply sort of compare. Is this the policy that went before our boards and was approved? I'll describe my process, and then Chris, if you want to talk about the sort of the way that you went through that and looking at it for your board, and obviously our attendees from the Region 9 board, you're welcome to pitch in as well. I went through each one of the items. So we have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 series items here on the list. I went through each one. I first went to my source documents, the sort of documents that we put in front of the Easton board. And I favorited all of those. And I know this is a sort of technical explanation, but it's complicated. So I favorited all of those. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to be able to launch each one of these, and I'll show you sort of how this works. So I launched this guy. Oh, well, this is the one example where I didn't have access to that one. So here's one that I
didn't have that one either.
So, but everyone else, I was able to click here, and then I can go tools. There we go, tools, compare document, and I can say starred, so that I make sure that I'm not seeing some document that I had access to, but wasn't the document that we reviewed. And I starred all of our documents, and now I can say, oh, I'm looking for the deadly weapon, right? and here's the deadly weapons and firearms that we approved. I can open that document and compare. And now this is going to go boom, and it's going to spit out documents like this, which will have a carefully annotated comparison of the documents. And here we can see, the blank board, sort of that has been filled in. The logo at the top that says Shipman, that has been converted to, say, Easton board. So I went through that process, and then I reviewed each one of the documents that came out of that process. And so that is the process that I went through. I don't know if, Chris, you want to describe your process or recap?
Yeah, sure. So what I did when we brought these policies to the Reading board for a second reading, I had provided a Schedule A and a Schedule B for the first reading that basically said, Schedule A, here's everything we're adopting in a table.
Yep.
Schedule B, here's everything that we are reserving and not repealing. And when we brought it to a second reading, I amended the Schedule A because between the first reading and the second reading, we made additional changes as a committee, and then I made additional changes going into Reading to adopt the committee's sort of points. And my Schedule A for the board included annotations as to everything that changed between the first reading and the second reading.
Mm-hmm.
And including which was withdrawn, including where I'd adopted language, added language, changed language. And so then I used my Schedule A and I used this column and I went through the policies to make sure that the policies that are on this table aligned with my notes on the Schedule A. And that was a shortcut to say, if I see language about the SSO here, I know that this is the policy that I drafted because that wasn't in the language until I touched it and nothing has happened since then. Mm-hmm. And so I went through to confirm that what Dr. McKinnon has put here conforms with the Reading board second reading packet. Mm-hmm. And it did. I left comments throughout the Shipman policies where there were regulations that the board did not adopt and specifically withdrew and did not take action on, just so we're clear as to where formal action was taken, formal action wasn't taken. I then went through the legacy policies against my Schedule B to see whether they lined up and whether they were consistent. And I found that for the most part they were, except the 5145 series was held in its entirety. And there are about 8 or 9 policies in 5145, only 3 of which are listed here. And so there's a whole tranche more that needs to be added to this list for it to be complete. Otherwise, I found it to be an accurate recounting of the work that was done this spring.
Okay. Good. And Region 9, Kathy and Cheryl, do you want to talk at all about the process you went through?
Sure, I could start, Kathy, and you want to just jump in. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So we're kind of both speaking, and Sarah, I'm sure this will kind of fill in what Sarah did as well. But as an overall policy committee, we started our process as two concurrent meetings. As you guys know from the summer, we went through all of the policies that each board would move forward with. So Region 9 came up with its own after feedback from the majority of our board. What we ended up doing was bifurcating policies that we were advancing, which, for generally speaking, are aligned with what Reading and Easton and Easton advanced forward. And we went for, I think we had 2 or 3 meetings where we had first reading, second reading, and then we narrowed it down to a list of policies that were approved. We concurrently repealed the corresponding policies that would replace that were superseded by the new policies. And there are a number of policies that we tabled, which include the ones that each of the 3 boards policies committee decided to table for different reasons, for different substantive reasons. And then those are kind of where we are right now with respect to what we have to decide today, or at least talk through today, how we're going to review those. And that's kind of the overall process from how we vetted it and approved those. So what remains, go ahead, Chris.
Is the list on Dr. McKinnon's spreadsheet an accurate reflection of the state of play in Region 9?
Yes, what I did individually, and Kathy can jump in, is to just ensure that the policy list is what was approved and repealed per the minutes from the minute during which Region 9 met. And so I kind of went through that on a spot check basis, but Kathy may have found some. We didn't get a chance to meet beforehand, but she may have found some other details. But from what I've reviewed, there's nothing that is inconsistent. One thing that I particularly looked for is whether or not a repealed policy is still on that list. I did not find any. And likewise, looking at adoption dates on each individual policy link, as John described what was done for Easton, I looked at some of those adoption dates where we did not move forward with adopting a policy. Those are the old dates. Where we did, it's aligned with what we approved in July.
I did a similar review, and then I did what, John, it sounds like you did, but I did it manually because I don't have your Google skill and technical knowledge to do what you just did, when I would love to learn how to do that. But it does seem to me potentially that the files uploaded to Region 9 are not the final files that I emailed everybody. I shared a folder on September 5th. And I went through policy by policy, and I believe they're from a previous folder, because we had gone through and adjusted pronouns, and some of these don't reflect the final pronoun adjustments that were made after we got approval from Shipman and Goodwin. So I think we need to address that.
Okay.
Can I say something there?
Please.
So I thought that I had the right folder. It's hard to tell. There's been a lot of documents being shared back and forth at different times.
I know.
And and when the folder and the spreadsheet that I was working out of, when I went in and looked at each of the Region 9 policies where you had suggested changes to pronouns, and it was you and Kathy and Sarah, and it was also, it may have been Gwen or someone from Shipman also suggesting changes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see where all of your tracked changes were and what your recommendations were. And so I just went in and accepted whatever your change was. So if you said that you wanted to change a particular pronoun to they or some other variation of that, I could see your edit where you cross something out and what the new edit was. And I just, whenever I accepted that change, so I'm just wondering why that didn't work if I accepted what your edits, what your changes were.
Because I think what may have happened is that the folder I sent on September 5th were the clean files. You would not have had to have accepted any edits. They were we went through everything, so that the thought was that you didn't have to manage edits. Everything was clean as approved by the Region 9 board. So I know it sounds like it wasn't the most final folder. And I know, to your point, there were multiple folders and documents because it's been a long process.
So there were changes made to the text after the Region 9 board approved the policies?
There weren't changes made to the text, but what was addressed when the policies were approved by the Region 9 board, we were awaiting final approval from Shipman and Goodwin as to how to handle pronouns, because it had been raised that he/she was used, and that wasn't he/she/they, for example. And the discussion was, and Shipman agreed with this, was that where possible, where it made sense and grammatical sense in the context of the policy, to eliminate pronouns and use a noun. So for example, instead of his, her, designee, just say designee.
Right.
And that applied in most cases. However, there were some cases where there wasn't a noun that worked and made sense. So we did go into those cases and we did use he/she/they. That or him, her, them. And that's what we did. And the Region 9 board agreed that pending Shipman's final agreement to that change, those changes would be made and the policies were approved. And that's what was sent out, the final clean documents of those policies.
So it sounds like, while it stinks that Dr. McKinnon went through and sort of accepted changes in different things and sort of spent some time doing that, the remedy here is that the links represented here don't need to be the ones that sort of Dr. McKinnon copied and then accepted changes to, right? Sort of that. They can be the folder that so it's just these links need to link to those documents instead of the documents they're currently linked to.
Yes.
And then this will accurately reflect the most recent and sort of the policies that you sort of were a part of your final review and approval process for your board.
Yes.
Okay. Does that, Dr. McKinnon, does that make sense to you as well? That it's, that you have documents that need no further edits in any way. They don't need to, have a new header put on or sort of change edits accepted or anything like that.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
We just have to get the new documents and relink them.
Yep.
And just so you know, we do that. That's not something that I hand off to staff, because we're trying to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah. There's a level of fidelity and sort of accuracy that needs to happen here. That, and frankly, it's not a bad thing to just get your eyes in front of all the policies, even if it seems like it's within the context of a mundane task. It's like, oh yeah, that's again in front of my eyes. It's helpful.
So just so I level set, because and this might be my miss. My understanding was that the pronoun situation would have driven the finalization of all of the policies on each of the respective boards where there's a single policy across all districts, that would have been part of the cleanup, if you will. And then that would have been the final, but it sounds like there's a disconnect. And
this is all news to me that Region 9 went
too.
off and said, let's make a whole bunch of changes after we adopt them, because that's.
Yeah. And look, I could imagine that we could have established sort of as a part of our motions that, this very sort of small set of sort of clarifications in those pronouns, or it's like that could have been a part of like, hey, these changes are acceptable. I could imagine that maybe we could craft it, but we didn't, because we didn't know that was happening. So we now have forked versions of the policies.
Yeah.
It seems like it's extensive and
it all could have been remedied by a sort of
cover page.
A cover page that says any reference to he, she, or they shall mean any of he, she, or they, inclusive, exclusive, etc. Because there's going to be legacy policies that have pronouns we don't like too.
Right.
And you're never going to actually stay on top of it all. And you're going to have a situation where you have 80 policies that are sort of pronoun inclusive and 20 that aren't. And that implies that you're trying not to be inclusive in the 20, which I don't think is the point.
Yeah. And I think that, again, this is probably a miss on the part of the assumption that was made that would happen, as part of this cleanup process. So I think, I'll defer to the chairs of the committee.
Cheryl, I spent a weekend.
I understand, Chris. I'm trying to, because I don't want this to go where the conversation usually goes. And sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I'm gonna throw something out that is intended to be constructive, and it is probably, and I'll defer to whoever needs to decide, is to perhaps to make this administratively easier, is to just recommend that the boards give the administration discretion to update and then use the tri-board meeting to just reiterate the consent to change the pronouns and synchronize that, so that we don't, to the comment about branching off, that it doesn't create this literally two separate documents for substantively the same thing, because one has pronouns in it and one that doesn't. We didn't, as a board, I don't think I don't want to speak for the board, but as an individual board member, we didn't think through that level of detail, and I think we should. And this is exactly the kind of precisely why I think it's very helpful, while it's kind of, lead to a long board meeting. I think it's very helpful to have this discussion with all three boards there, assuming these two committees align first.
I mean, Cheryl, it's beating a dead horse.
I
but,
know, Chris, but we have to move forward with something.
I agree, but the point of having first reading, second readings, and joint policy committee meetings in between was to resolve these issues so that we didn't branch out when we went back. And that's why we had these meetings, we had these discussions. I spent a weekend in May just plowing through and cleaning up all these policies, sharing them with everybody on these committees. I adopted them that way. John adopted them that way in Easton. And the fact that we're sitting here on September 30th, and John and I are hearing for the first time that Region 9 decided, in addition, they're going to make a whole bunch of grammatical changes on the backside, is frustrating.
Yeah. So in the interest of sort of
just to clarify, these are not grammatical changes. They are pronoun changes. The discussion around pronouns had been held in multiple, we had that discussion. We all worked weekends to get these policies in good shape. All of us did. And the Reading Board of Ed meeting was several weeks in advance of the Region 9 Board of Ed meeting, where we were presenting our policies for first reading. As is the Easton Board of Ed meeting, I believe, was a week or two prior to ours. We were the last board to meet, just from a calendar standpoint, to take policies to first reading. You took policies to first reading that were not in agreement, that our board, members of our board, everybody was not in agreement with everything that you took to first reading, which put us in a situation of we had to address board comments and board concerns when we took our policies to first reading. So I think ideally, everybody would have been on the same page before the policies went to first reading, understanding where everybody was working. And because we were all working over the weekend and we were all trying to meet our dates, I don't think we ever had.
All trying to meet Region 9's dates.
Yeah, and to be clear, Region 9 arbitrarily established that timeline and set of dates.
And then blew through it.
And then fell off of that track. But in the interest of being constructive, and to be clear, like, there was a point at which Region 9 was engaging with Shipman and Goodman way beyond what we initially said that we agreed that we were going to do, and the feedback that we were going to get. And there was no clear point in space where we said they're going to land. And so I think Easton and Reading said, we no longer have confidence that Region 9 is going to complete this process. And so we just said at least 2 of the 3 boards can land on a common set of policies.
Yes.
So that was why we proceeded, because we no longer felt that there was a good faith effort, and not because of you, not because of Cheryl, not because of Sarah, but because of the larger Region 9 board, who seemed to have an attitude of, we're going to do whatever we want to do on whatever timeline we want to do it on.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is I'm trying to be constructive as well here. I'm trying to explain and clarify why I think this is part of what happened, because to your points, for many reasons, which we do not have to rehash, we didn't end up working in lockstep as planned or hoped. So everybody was doing their very best to get good work forward, approved, and done. That was the spirit, I think, in which we were all working. It was not perfect. We all know, have many reasons why. I think at this point, John, you clarified it for Dr. McKenna. I think our links for Region 9 column need to be updated. It was meant to be helpful to send them clean documents. That was meant to be helpful. And I apologize if it was confusing because there have been many folders. So,
And I think there's a path forward, and I think Cheryl articulated it. And while it may be frustrating, it's like, okay, it's in the past, and we can, I think, and we can use the same comparison process. If we know we both have a policy, we can compare the Easton Reading, which should be the same, against the Region 9, and that should provide us with a clear map of here, 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 and here, there's been a pronoun change. Here, 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 and here, we've resolved to the noun. And I think if we take that process, if we take that summary of the documents to our boards, we could do a first reading and then resolve at the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Committee tri-board meeting.
I really hesitate to bring 40 policies back to my board for the purposes of making these changes, because it's going to reopen Pandora's box on a number of issues.
Yeah.
I will add that Shipman, when the question came up with Shipman, they said it's a good question, and they are addressing it in the policies they write going forward.
Which is good.
So going forward, they're adjusting as to how they word their policies. So hopefully going forward in the new model policies, this won't be
I like that.
a manual effort.
I like that we're having an influence on this sort of source of policy language for a lot of districts. And I think, we have that ability because they see we've put in the homework, we've done our homework, we put in a ton of time looking at every one of these policies very carefully. And so that's going to have sort of large impact across the state. I also think that there's an opportunity for us to suggest to Shipman, please put together a transition policy, right? Or not a policy.
I would much rather have a policy 001 that says all policies adopted by the X Board of Education are intended to be inclusive in the following ways. Any reference to he or she shall also include they, any reference to this shall also include that, and vice versa. And then as policies are amended over time to follow Shipman's revised models, it will all fall into line. But in the meantime, you have a catch-all that's not creating a situation where, the absence of a change implies intent. And I don't want to imply intent in some places, but not others.
Right.
So, but for the purposes of right now, for Dr. McKinnon's purposes, the Reading spreadsheet is correct with the exception of the additional non-repealed policies in the sexual harassment section, which I pointed out before. Otherwise, I'm happy for that to be published with the removal or movement of the regulation only ones in a clear way.
Chris and John, can you show me where you said 5.1?
It's at the very bottom, 5145.44. If you go to the entire 5145 series was held and not repealed. And if you pull up 5145 in the current policies, it is
the policy titles.
Let me just see. I'm pulling this up. So if I go to 5141 on the web page now,
do you want to share?
Maybe
I can navigate. It's fine. Just tell me where to go.
So 5145.
Are you talking about the policies the policies you didn't repeal? So not the policies you adopted up above.
Correct. I'm at the very bottom. Those which were not repealed included everything in 5145. And so that includes civil rights, civil and legal rights and responsibilities.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Search and seizure, racial harassment.
It should be I see what you're saying. It should be the entirety of the 5145.
Right, not just 51.44, but 51 point anything.
Right.
That includes the 3 Title IX policies that are on there: sex harassment, gender identity, student grievance procedure. Like it's a whole run in 5145.
Is that everything that we approved back in 2020 or something like that?
Effectively. And so We
So
used
it's anything with a 51.
5145.
anyone that says
dot
starts
anything.
5145 was not repealed in our motions.
Right.
The entire series 5145.
Okay. And is that the same for Easton?
Yes. Yeah, we use the same sort of Schedule A, Schedule B for that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know how I missed that. Okay.
That's the value of having this meeting. Belt and suspenders.
So
to-
that resolves it for Reading, and it sounds like it resolved it for Easton too, probably.
And
Well
then, and then there is one, the automatic defibrillator thing. I didn't have access to it for some reason.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'm gonna go on faith that it's the correct one. And so then I would, beyond that, I would leave it to Dr. McKinnon and the, Region 9 committee to figure out how to resolve the linking issue on that side. I don't have access to any of those policies, so I don't even know what they say.
Which is, yeah, I mean.
In
And
the
sorry, go
spirit
ahead.
of belt, I'm sorry, John.
belt and suspenders. Go for
I was
it.
going to say, in the spirit of belt and suspenders, I didn't do a complete cross-referencing, but I did a kind of a spot check across the three boards. And I did notice that for both Easton and Reading, you had adopted sexual offenders on school property in Series 1000.
Mhm.
It's a regulation, but that document still has the Shipman heading in
Logo.
it.
We didn't
Yep.
adopt it,
And it's on the list.
and it's
Yeah.
noted that we didn't adopt it.
Yeah,
Okay, so I just wanted to, because it does still have, it's posted on this form, and it does still have shipment, and it still has optional language in it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Just-
I had a question about that, and so I did put that in there, and it had regulation only. There's a couple of those that have regulations only and not policies, and so I believe I made there were some policies in the 4000 series as well.
Yeah,
So,
and
Yeah, Jason,
and
every
Mike-
one
Mike
where I
goes
dropped a
off the list.
comment on here was not actually brought to the board. And I think they also align with the ones that still have shipment headers. So they were never approved.
Okay,
yeah, my
Or-
understanding from last week's discussion is that we were going to use this format to post things, regulations and policy, right? And then just so the reader who would make no distinction nor needs to understand necessarily what a policy is in the process for that versus regulation, which we wouldn't adopt. That my understanding was that this is going to be kind of a compendium with everything, agnostic to how it was approved. So, and that's kind of the way but I did flag those, Jason, to your point about, I kind of
things
just
that
a
were
reminder
regulations.
there, just to kind of reiterate that. But that's my understanding from last week. But I kind of stopped putting comments in because I realized, well, wait a minute, we were going to use this for everything.
Right.
And then where it says policy implies that it went through the appropriate approval process through each board. And then where it says regulation, it doesn't need to be.
As I reviewed the documents, sort of looked at the comparison view of each of the documents, the sort of panic moment for me was when I saw large sets of, sort of pink text, and I went, uh-oh, why are these so different? And it was inevitably every time regulation.
Yeah.
And so that was good. The way that we talked about this in Easton when we reviewed the sort of policies is that there were a number of things in here that are regulations, and that regulations are different from policies. And I gave a little sort of blurb about sort of why that is. Us approving a regulation does not make it a policy, right? Us approving a regulation is saying that we review that regulation. Now, should we review regulations? I think the consensus is that we should not. That the role of the board is to approve the policy, and then the role of the administration is to sort of adopt regulations as they see fit, to adhere to those policies. So we may want to go back and say, hey, we're making clear in some process down the road that these regulations are the administrators are sort of authorized to do what they need to do to update these regulations, to run the schools. But Because it is a regulation, it doesn't need to be called out inside of this sort of policy index, right? Now, perfect world, we plan to have a website where each policy is listed, the corresponding regulations are accessible in some sort of meaningful and easy way. Great. That's not what this is. This is a policy index that is simply meant to say, hey, everybody, we know that you have a right to see the policies that are currently in effect in the districts. And we, that's a huge effort if we're talking about re-engineering all of our websites to do that in a clean way. The easy path to at least get these in front of people right now is here are the policies in this essentially Google Sheets presentation. Right, so this is just an index of all the policies that people have access to it and can navigate to it and sort of review them as soon as humanly possible. My proposal would be anything on here that's a regulation should not actually be in this index.
Okay, I can take those off. At the very least, I can delink them.
Right. Yeah, and then like obviously as soon as possible, we want to get the website set up and have the perfect solution where you see policy and you can navigate to regulation and all that. That's great.
So John, help me understand your comments. So I think going forward, you're saying you want to remove it from an index and put regulations elsewhere?
Yeah, the way that I think about it is the policy is the pivot, right? So I'm going in looking for the policy. I see the policy. When I click on that policy, there should be a sort of rich experience where I can see here's the policy and here's the regulations and sort of any relevant sort of other documentation, links out to laws, like that'll be wonderful. But let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. And right now, good is we got to get these policies so that they're accessible to the public. Like that's required. So how do we get these to the public as quickly as possible? We give them this policy index and then they can browse to their heart's content through the policies.
And then for regulations, to the extent that there's red lines or not ready, then there would be no link there.
Yeah, we don't need to post the regulations right now. That's not required.
But the intent is to do it later on.
We should.
Okay, got it.
Like it's like the way we do public comments, right? We believe public comment is really important. Are we required to do public comment? No, we're not. But we think it's really important to the dialogue and to democracy. So we do it, right? And same thing here.
I don't want to create more confusion or more work than we need to. The focus of this body needs to be making sure that the policies are accurate, adopted, and in compliance. Ultimately, the administration has full authority to adopt whatever regulations they do or don't want. And we've deleted a bunch of regulations from these policies.
Right.
Because they weren't policies that the administration will likely want to rehabilitate and bring back as regulations. But I don't want to get into that mess right now. So that the simplest piece is where we flag things as not actually adopted because they're regulations, they can just come off of this if this is just a policy index, so that we can bring this to a reasonable conclusion and say this is the policy index as of October 1st, 2022.
Yep.
And not to interject here, but does it make sense, or does the administration feel the need to have another document or something that says, and here are our regulations? Separate and distinct from policies? Again, just to draw that.
Since you're talking about this, I normally how this has been done in the past is that you have a policy, you open up a document, and there's the policy. And then below the policy, you keep scrolling down. It's on a new page. It says administration regulation, and the policy and the regulation are they're in the same place. Yeah. And it's just common practice that the board does not approve below where the policy is, where the footer is. This was adopted at such and such date. There's a new line, and that's where the regulations are.
Yeah. We have a weird circumstance where the three boards could approve slightly different policies, but the administration could adopt the same regulation to implement all three policies.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which might serve to your benefit. So it's
right.
Yeah, but I do have a member of the public asking me for this and kind of pointing out, well, you adopted these policies a long time ago. We need to see them. And so I do really want to get this index correct so that we can send that out as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
I love the word index. I just changed it at the top.
Cool.
And just to the this document, which is excellent, will the links right now, they're writable to us, like we can go in and I could go in when I read this and change it, but they will be read only for the pub. Is that just because
For
we have
everybody,
access
for
to these
us too,
files?
they should be read only.
I mean, they'll ultimately be read only because right now they're editable.
Yeah, that's a sharing setting. And right now you have edit rights because that's how they were shared with you, or even shared with me.
Right.
So once we get them where we need to be, then we can go into sharing settings and make it a view only.
Yes, I think that the sort of this group, Policy Pals, is nerdy enough, right? But I want to see. I always want to strive for more nerdness. So what we just did is in coding and sort of development and application development terms, we just did a quality assurance test, right? And we found some, oh, hey, these should be linked over here. So awesome. When we roll this out, once the Region 9 board says all these links are right, once we have down at the very bottom, we have the sort of what Chris was talking about in terms of the Title IX stuff. And, once all that's in there and we go to push this to the public, we should be doing a user acceptance test. We should be doing a sort of, we're now all in here when it's live, first users ever on the system saying, yes, this is in practice, this is working properly. And that should be a part of our script, right? I can't edit this, right? I can't make comments on it, right? I can't, right? Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Like we should follow a certain discipline in the sort of implementation and sort of rollout of this thing. And we have a role to play there, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thought I had from a user standpoint is that we have all of the newly adopted policies up top by series, and then it goes to existing policies, but in reality, they're all existing policies. So it might be a bit confusing to somebody reading it, a parent thinking,
Yeah, that's right.
So we said legacy last week. Yeah.
Yeah, legacy policy, I think, was what the comment that we made.
So-
Right.
I did it that way, Kathy, just because I'm just trying to keep straight in my head
I
which
know,
ones were new and which ones you may want to go back in the future and take a look at.
yes, and I
And
know,
so,
so
if you want to change that to legacy policies,
I mean, there's another way to do it, which is to say that this is the working document for this group because we understand the difference. And then when you push this to the public, you just merge the 1,000s, 2,000, 3,000s, 4,000s, 5,000s, 6,000s,
Yeah.
and that is the policy index.
Right.
Because ultimately, from the public's perspective, it doesn't matter whether it was adopted in 97 or 2022. It matters more for us because it's a signpost to us to say, hey, this is the transportation policy that we agreed we had to go back and take out of the parking lot to work through.
My recommendation, I think that's the right answer, but my recommendation would be that either in the naming convention or in some adjacent field that's right next to it or something, we have some indication so that down the road, a year from now, we're looking at a policy and somebody's asking about, well, why, blah, blah, blah. We can say this was one of the policies that we tabled, and is it right? There will inevitably be some utility in that.
Is it so? So let me just help me understand what problem we're trying to solve here. Is that to clarify for the reader what was recently adopted this summer versus not? Like,
no, I think
what does it matter? Like how what
it will matter to us. It will matter to the administration in its implementation. I'm sure for the reader, it should be relatively, sort of, like almost like they wouldn't even notice. So for instance, let's say that you put an asterisk or you did a little sort of parenthetical on the end, LP for legacy policy or whatever. but ultimately, I agree, to the average consumer of this, when I say, show me the 1000 series, I should not be looking at 11 policies. When I say, show me the 1000 series, I should be looking at those 11 plus all of these, right? They should just all be together.
Because no one's going to know to scroll down.
Right.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
repeat.
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I am suggesting that we should have some visual indicator so that somebody in central office who is adhering to this, or a building leader or whoever, can say, I know why we're having this issue. This is one of those policies, either the ones that we updated or the ones that it will make our jobs easier if we have some visual indicator for ourselves.
I mean, you could also just say that there's a column that says year of adoption, and all
Yeah,
the ones with
yeah.
2022.
Right.
And the number of withheld policies for Reading and Easton is so short. I'm happy to plug the years in for those old ones myself if there's a column. That's easy.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's actually useful to everybody anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I try not to understand the problem. So thanks, John. That was helpful. I mean, to me, and I'm trying to avoid, having some poor individual person, because it's going to fall on one or two people, have to change, 500 documents because, individual or a small group of individuals have a certain opinion about how things should be presented, right? So
Right.
we need to get out of that business. But if maybe we can literally just copy paste, like these are all thousands, right? And then
Right.
put them in the sections that are up top. But I know it sounds like we need to have a tracking mechanism for what whoever needs to pick up to change the
Yeah.
policies. And,
But
and that might be an elegant solution with that, Chris.
Yeah, I think the year is a super easy way to do it. And we can just add it, have a column adjacent to each one of these. And right now we know it's going to be 2022.
For
And we can
80% of
literally
them.
just drag down 2022 on all of these.
We could have
and
done it
then-
the time we've been talking about it.
And then these other ones there'll be a little bit more work to just actually look at each one of the policies and make sure that they're, the data is reflected.
Every time we kind of go in and we start looking at policies and we think about, well, what is this going to look like? And we think about our website.
Yeah.
And then we start thinking about our website, and our website needs to be completely revamped. And we even find that even as our website is currently formatted at the moment, there are still missing policies on our website that we have paper policies sitting out in binders so at some point in time in the past, a policy's been adopted, but it hasn't been put on the website. So there are, the idea is to put all the policies on a Google sheet.
Right.
And have it independent to the website. You click, the public sees the policy, they click on it. Doesn't matter where it goes, they just get the policy. That's what they need.
Yep.
Maybe in the short term, as we're trying to solve this, we can create an additional tab at the bottom of this Google sheet that one is a workspace, so that policy members can actually clearly differentiate the policies that you have adopted and the legacy policies. However we decide to do it, the public gets a sheet that has all the policies, the legacy and the new policies in one place. So I totally agree with you. And we were just doing it this way so that you could easily see.
And it could also be solved with explanatory text at the top of the sheet that just says the three boards of education are in the process of overhauling their policies. They've adopted a bunch. There are a number that are still in review. The top half of the sheet is new policies. The bottom half of the sheet is existing policies that continue to be enforced and are subject to ongoing review.
Yeah. Click on the link to the corresponding policy to determine what date during which it was adopted. Done.
Right.
And then we pick it apart one at a time, because I don't want, to John's point about, perfect being, the enemy of progress. Let's just get this up and make it the least administratively burdensome for all of us. And then put a kind of disclaimer on the top, what's in progress, and then we'd be done with it. Because otherwise we'll never get this posted.
It's always going to be an evolving document, because we're always going to be working through this for time immemorial. And part of the problem that the districts have had is this idea that we need to get everything done before we've sort of got to the start line, and
Right.
we're never going to get to the start line that way.
Right. So, and I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. So it sounds like Kathy is going to share with Dr. McKinnon the sort of make sure that we're looking at the right directory, and that the links here are going to the appropriate ones. I think we had some ideas about adding a year to the left of this, and I think I could do a little, sort of copy this and paste and say like, hey, here's how that could look. But if we instead want to just put the explanatory text that Chris suggested, like that would allow us, if you have the directory, Kathy, today, like we could post this today and we could say like, here you go, everybody, here's the explanatory test. This is in flux. We're going to perfect this and make it even easier for people to consume eventually on the website. But even in the interim, maybe we can add dates, a week from now, 2 weeks from now.
Right. Get it out of the gate.
Yeah.
So we can get back to doing the work of figuring out what
Right.
those substantive policies need to be revised.
Which is the next step, which is I think we are now scheduled to meet the third Friday of, is that right? The third Friday of October. I think that's right, the 21st. And our homework between now and then is to look at these legacy policies and to come back with prioritization to say, I've reviewed, I understand what's in each one of these legacy policies. Here are the ones that we believe are most important to attack first, right? And I think that prioritization could be one of two things. Either there's been significant change in law and our policy isn't reflecting that, we really should get on that, or this is easy stuff. Why did we punt on this? And this will take very little discussion, and we should just approve this.
And when we talk about the legacy policy, we're looking for ones for which all three boards maintained policies.
Yeah, I'm not interested in arguing about items that are on the Region 9 held list. If they're not on our held list, it's like that's for Region 9 to address. It's really down here where we have like transfer of funds between Easton and Reading, and I don't know
Are there any held policies on Easton and Reading that weren't held by Region 9? And it's hard to look across the line because the numbers get
right
out of sync. I assume that everything on the Easton Reading list is also in the Region 9 list.
Yeah, Chris, I think generally speaking, that's a correct statement. I guess the one caveat I'll provide is that there's different policies that apply to high schools that have led to kind of how they've deviated over time. But generally speaking, yes. I mean, there were things like the pool safety, and Kathy, keep me honest here, like pool safety and the sunscreen, where there was substantive discussion about, if it's NA, that kind of stuff, where there might be deviation that's based on the current review. But the rest, where there isn't synchronization, if you will, would be because that's the way it was built years ago.
Right. But like the grants, gifts, and bequests policies, for example, I think are slightly different across all three districts. But that's something where it needs to be a goal to find common ground to have a single policy.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a transfer of funds. That's coincidentally, I think John has this highlighted now, but that's one of them as well.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So is everybody clear on what we're trying to do within the next few weeks is to review those items where all three boards have the policy and have held that policy, and then we come together to say, what do we think about prioritization of moving this forward? So we are like very forward looking then at that point and trying to whittle down the list that we're looking at here.
John, could I add that I went through the shipment updates and
Mhm.
what was mandated versus regulations versus, best practice.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
there aren't that many that were new as of July 1st.
Right.
And I think they should be fairly straightforward. So is that? can
Yeah, I
Potentially
think that's
add
great
that.
too. It's basically what we're the agenda for our next meeting is, what are the important, what are the things that we want to prioritize for discussion and recommendation for approval. And that should include the legacy, but it should also include, and I would argue, I would prioritize it personally, the new items that Shipman has recommended to us.
I don't think it's onerous. It's a few policies. And I don't think it's crazy.
Yeah, that's great.
Dr. McKinnon, would you like me to resend the folder of our final clean policies so you have it new in your inbox?
That would be great. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry you did that extra work. I apologize.
No, and I'm sorry that I didn't see that that email. I think I may have worked off a list that Sarah had provided. I don't know what happened there, but
I'll email it to you right now.
okay.
So I think that will bring us to a close the discussion, possible action. We'll go to committee member comment. Hearing none, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Chris. We are unanimously adjourned at 10 a.m. Thanks, everybody.